In the ancient kingdom of Westbrook, there lived a kind and just king named Edward. He was loved by his people for his fairness and generosity. His beautiful wife, Queen Victoria, was equally adored for her compassion and wisdom. However, despite their happiness, there was one thing that troubled the royal couple: they had no male heir to the throne. According to the traditions of Westbrook, a king must have a male heir before his 50th birthday. If not, the throne would be given to another family. This law had been in place for centuries, and even a beloved king like Edward was not exempt from it. Queen Victoria had given birth to 4 daughters: Alice, Beatrice, Charlotte, and Diana. Each time the queen became pregnant, the whole kingdom would pray for a male child. But each time, their prayers went unanswered. As King Edward's 50th birthday approached, his political enemies began to plot. Chief among them was the cunning William, who had always envied the king's position. William would often meet with his supporters in secret, planning how they could take advantage of the situation. "The king has no male heir," William would say with a sly smile. "Soon, the throne will be ours for the taking." Meanwhile, King Edward and Queen Victoria were growing increasingly worried. They loved their daughters dearly, but they knew the kingdom needed a male heir to maintain stability. One day, just a few months before the king's 50th birthday, Queen Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. The news spread through the kingdom like wildfire, and everyone hoped that this time, it would be a boy. The elders of the kingdom met and decided to wait until the queen gave birth before making any decisions about the throne. This gave the royal couple a glimmer of hope. As the months passed, Queen Victoria's belly grew, and so did the anticipation in the kingdom. But the queen had a secret plan. She had made an arrangement with the village midwife, a kind-hearted woman named Martha. "If I give birth to another girl," the queen had whispered to Martha, "I want you to switch the baby with a boy from another mother who's due around the same time." Martha was shocked by the request, but understood the queen's desperation. She reluctantly agreed, knowing the consequences if they were caught. As fate would have it, on the day Queen Victoria went into labor, another woman in the village named Emma also began her labor. Emma was a poor woman who already had 5 children and was struggling to feed them all. In the early hours of the morning, Queen Victoria gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. But before anyone could see the child, Martha quickly took the baby and rushed to check on Emma. To her relief, Emma had given birth to a healthy baby boy. With shaking hands, Martha swapped the babies. She brought the boy to the royal chamber and announced to the waiting crowd, "It's a boy. The kingdom has an heir." The joy in the kingdom was uncontainable. King Edward wept with happiness as he held his supposed son. The political enemies, including William, were silenced, their plans thwarted by the arrival of a male heir. The baby boy was named George, and he grew up as the beloved Prince of Westbrook. No one suspected that he was not of royal blood. Years passed, and George grew into a handsome and kind-hearted young man. He was adored by the people for his humility and intelligence. Meanwhile, the girl who had been swapped at birth, named Elizabeth, grew up in Emma's humble home, unaware of her royal heritage. When George turned 18, King Edward decided it was time for him to see more of the world. "My son," he said, "you must travel to the city to learn about commerce and governance. This knowledge will serve you well when you become king." George was excited about the opportunity. He packed his bags and set off for London, the bustling city filled with opportunities and adventures. Coincidentally, around the same time, Elizabeth also left for London. She had always dreamed of learning a trade and making a better life for herself and her family. With her mother's blessing and the little savings they had, she too set off for the big city. London was a world away from the quiet village of Westbrook. George and Elizabeth, though from the same village, had never met before. But fate had other plans for them. One sunny afternoon, George was walking through a busy market when he accidentally bumped into a young woman carrying a basket of flowers. The flowers scattered all over the ground, and George immediately bent down to help pick them up. "I'm so sorry," he said, looking up. His eyes met those of Elizabeth, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Elizabeth was struck by the young man's kindness and his striking resemblance to someone she couldn't quite place. "It's all right," she said with a smile. "Thank you for helping." From that moment on, George and Elizabeth began to see each other regularly. They would meet at the market, take walks in Hyde Park, and talk for hours about their dreams and aspirations. Neither of them knew about their true origins or the connection they shared. As the months passed, their friendship blossomed into love. George, who had never felt such strong emotions before, knew that Elizabeth was the one he wanted to spend his life with. After 2 years in London, George decided it was time to return to Westbrook. He had learned much about commerce and governance, and he felt ready to take on more responsibilities in the kingdom. But he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Elizabeth behind. "Come with me," he said to her one evening as they watched the sunset from Primrose Hill. "Come to Westbrook. I want you to meet my parents. I want to marry you, Elizabeth." Elizabeth was overjoyed. She had grown to love George deeply, and the thought of becoming his wife made her happier than she had ever been. She agreed to go with him, excited to see the royal palace she had heard so much about. When they arrived in Westbrook, the whole kingdom celebrated the return of their prince. King Edward and Queen Victoria were delighted to see how much their son had grown and matured. However, when George introduced Elizabeth and expressed his desire to marry her, the Queen's face turned pale. Queen Victoria recognized Elizabeth immediately. The young woman was the spitting image of her at that age. She knew, without a doubt, that this was the daughter she had given away at birth. The Queen began to make excuses, trying to dissuade George from the marriage. "She's not of noble birth," she would say, or, "We need to find you a princess from another kingdom to strengthen our alliances." But George was adamant. He loved Elizabeth and wanted no one else. King Edward, seeing his son's determination and feeling that Elizabeth was a kind and worthy young woman, eventually gave his blessing to the marriage. The kingdom buzzed with excitement as preparations for the royal wedding began. Everyone was happy for the young couple, except for Queen Victoria, who carried the heavy burden of her secret. On the day of the wedding ceremony, the entire kingdom gathered to witness the union. The royal chaplain, a man named Thomas, was present to perform the sacred rites. As Thomas began the ceremony, calling upon God to bless the union, something strange happened. A strong wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing all the candles. Thomas's eyes widened in shock. He felt a divine presence, revealing a truth that had been hidden for years. The chaplain raised his hands, silencing the crowd. "Stop!" he cried out. "This union cannot proceed. God has spoken. Prince George is not the biological son of King Edward and Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the king's fifth daughter, exchanged at birth." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Queen Victoria, who fell to her knees, overcome with emotion. "It's true," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I was desperate for a male heir. I arranged for the babies to be switched at birth. Forgive me, my king. Forgive me, my children." The revelation sent shockwaves through the kingdom. King Edward was stunned, unable to comprehend the betrayal. The court officials quickly stripped Queen Victoria of her royal title, and she was taken away to face judgment for her actions. George and Elizabeth were in shock. The love they had found was now tainted by the knowledge that they were siblings. They clung to each other, overwhelmed by the turn of events. As the news spread, the political enemies of King Edward saw an opportunity. Led by William, they quickly assembled and demanded that the kingship be taken away from Edward's family. "The king has no true heir," William shouted. "The throne should pass to another family, as our traditions dictate." The kingdom was thrown into chaos. Some supported King Edward, arguing that he had been a good and just ruler despite the deception. Others called for adherence to tradition, saying the lack of a male heir meant the kingship must change hands. In the midst of the uproar, Chaplain Thomas called for silence. "God will decide," he declared. "We will pray for divine guidance and abide by his decision." For 3 days and nights, Thomas secluded himself in the chapel, praying fervently for wisdom and guidance. The kingdom waited with bated breath for his return. On the 4th day, Thomas emerged, his face etched with divine revelation. The entire kingdom gathered to hear God's decision. "The Lord has spoken," Thomas announced. He acknowledges the deception but also recognizes the love and justice with which King Edward has ruled. He has decreed that the kingship shall pass to the family of George. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Thomas continued, "Though George does not carry royal blood, he has been chosen by God. The Lord has seen his kind heart and his good intentions for the kingdom. He shall be our new king." The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some were overjoyed, while others, particularly William and his supporters, were outraged. But none dared to go against what they believed to be divine will. And so, in a twist of fate, George was crowned as the new King of Westbrook. Though he did not have royal blood, his years of living as a prince had prepared him for this role. More importantly, his time in London and his love for Elizabeth had given him a perspective that would serve the kingdom well. Elizabeth, now recognized as a true princess of Westbrook, stood by George's side, not as his wife, but as his sister and trusted advisor. Together, they began to implement changes that would improve the lives of all in the kingdom. King Edward, though saddened by the deception, found joy in knowing that all 5 of his daughters were alive and well. He took on the role of advisor to the new king, sharing his years of wisdom and experience. As for Queen Victoria, she was banished from the palace but allowed to live in a small cottage on the outskirts of the village. Over time, as the pain of her actions began to heal, she was allowed to have a relationship with her children, though she never regained her royal status. William and the other political enemies were closely watched, but King George chose to rule with forgiveness rather than vengeance. He invited them to be part of his council, believing that even those who had opposed him might have valuable insights to offer. Under King George's rule, Westbrook flourished. He brought the knowledge he had gained in London to modernize the kingdom's commerce. He established schools and hospitals, ensuring that all children in the kingdom had access to education and medical care. Elizabeth used her experience of growing up in a poor family to advocate for the less fortunate. She set up programs to teach trades to young people and provide support for struggling families. The story of Westbrook's royal family became a legend, told and retold throughout the land. It was a tale of deception and betrayal, but also of love, forgiveness, and the unpredictable ways of fate. People would say that God had a plan all along, to bring a king who understood both royalty and common life, who could bridge the gap between tradition and progress. George and Elizabeth's unique experiences had prepared them perfectly for their roles. As the years passed, the Kingdom of Westbrook became known far and wide as a place of prosperity and justice. People would come from distant lands to seek the wisdom of King George and Princess Elizabeth. And so, dear viewers, we come to the end of our tale. It's a story that reminds us that our true worth is not in our blood or our birth, but in our actions and the love we show to others. It teaches us that even the greatest deceptions can lead to unexpected blessings, and that forgiveness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Remember, my friends, that life can take unexpected turns. What seems like a tragedy today might be the foundation of a better tomorrow. May we all have the wisdom to see beyond our immediate circumstances and the courage to embrace the path that life lays before us. Thank you for listening to this tale of Westbrook. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more folktales and legends. Until next time, may wisdom guide your path. Goodbye.